Well, we've got some pretty big news out of Florida, of all places, about the Venezuela coup that was foiled this past weekend. Now, I talked about this already earlier about how there was this Florida man who was apparently leading some kind of coup against Maduro to overthrow slash arrest him and replace him with Juan Guaido, and the U.S. said, the U.S. did not confirm that they were involved at all. They didn't officially deny it. What they said was, essentially, you can't believe anything Maduro says, which that's a kind of a blanket denial of everything. They're kind of, they didn't even really acknowledge that the whole operation kicked off. I guess they were implying that, maybe this whole thing was a false flag by Maduro, which I guess is possible. But this guy, Jordan Goudreau, who is the head of all this and is the head of this, I guess you'd call him a PMC, a private military contractor, Silvercorp, which is a pretty sinister sounding name. And ever since this all blew up, he's been, right out in front of it, insisting in the media, hey, this was real. I was the leader. I have all the receipts, and I did this on behalf of Juan Guaido. He signed a contract with my company to overthrow Maduro and install him, as the new president of Venezuela. And I said at the time, a couple days ago, that, hey, if he produces evidence of this, wow, that's going to be a pretty big deal. Juan Guaido going to a PMC to hire them to overthrow Maduro. That's a pretty big escalation. And of course, I said that him doing that without the U.S. At least consenting to it is pretty hard to believe, since he's very closely tied to the U.S. and the CIA and things like that. And certainly, if Juan Guaido is running around in the United States doing anything, meeting with Americans, the intel folks would know his every move. Lo and behold, though, now the Washington Post has published a document that they received from this Jordan Goudreau fellow, which has the signature not only of Guaido but of multiple, Venezuelan opposition figures, and details which parties are involved, and it's essentially a contract that lays out the plan that they are to carry out to overthrow Maduro. And so I guess you could say that still there's the possibility that this is some big fabrication to try and frame Guaido and the opposition, because how could they be so stupid as to sign all these documents which implicate them in an attempt to overthrow their government. A particularly blatant part of this is that I guess some of the political parties, their logos are like watermarked on the document in different places, and that just that just seems absurd to me, that you'd put your party logo on this what should be a very secret document that you don't ever want getting out, showing that you hired foreign mercenaries to overthrow your government. It's pretty funny reading through the article. I think I'll link it below. I can't remember which one I was. It was either I think on Tuesday the one I read was through Reuters, but this one was, I think, might have been Al Jazeera or something. But they were all citing Washington Post and Reuters. I don't think that Al Jazeera did any original reporting on this. And when they tried to contact Juan Guaido, he did not give any kind of comment, which you would think that he would want to vehemently deny this. And I guess in Venezuela, the opposition parties are publicly talking about this because kind of you have to. And they're, of course, saying, like you would expect, oh, no, we had nothing to do with this. What are you talking about? We just want there to be some kind of transition government. That's what we want. Peaceful transition. And, again, whether they are involved or not, they're going to say that anyway. So that really doesn't mean anything. I mean, you could very easily just say, oh, well, the peaceful transition wasn't working out for them. Their negotiations broke down. Maduro very clearly is not interested in transitioning to any other kind of government. And these folks kind of maybe felt like they ran out of options, so they decided to go with hiring this Florida man to overthrow Maduro. And these two Americans that they captured, who are veterans that are, were working to lead this whole raid, which, by the way, before I get into what they're saying, I just have to say, this contract alleges that Guaido and his folks paid over something like $200 million for this whole coup attempt. And I just have to say, for $200 million, you got 300 hooligans who, didn't even make it off the boat. You have to wonder what happened to those 300 guys because they only apparently got involved and spotted 12 of them trying to invade the capital. But really, for $200 million, you'd think that they'd be able to employ a few more troops. I mean, where did that 200 and something million dollars go? By the accounts we were hearing before, these camps that these guys were being trained in were, an absolute joke, totally run down, certainly not up to what you would consider to be CIA standard for, training insurgents. And these guys were way beyond insurgents. These were not supposed to be, just moderate rebels fighting in the jungle against the government. They were supposed to be the equivalent of, special forces guys to go in and take out Maduro, to invade, his, the executive compound, whatever they call it. I think it's Miraflores Palace. And so these guys are supposed to be the best of the best. These are not grunts, in the front lines of the infantry. And so if the Venezuelan opposition really did pay, over $200 million for all this, they got ripped off by this Florida man. And my guess is that the Venezuelan opposition didn't pay for it out of their own pocket. They paid for it out of all this money that they've been skimming from, being the professional opposition of Venezuela. Internationally, they've accumulated a lot of money. Of course, there was when some of Guaido's folks were in exile in Colombia, I think they actually got kicked out because they were just going out every night to nightclubs, snorting cocaine off of hookers' belly buttons, and they were causing too much trouble for the Colombians. And all this money they were spending on expensive clothes and hookers and cocaine was coming from money that was donated, to help whatever their current opposition cause was. I think it was something to do with getting food in there. Remember that whole debacle with the, burning the trucks of food that they blamed on Maduro, and then we had direct video showing that it was the opposition burning their own stuff. So these guys clearly aren't short of cash, because there's always folks in the international community, such as the National Endowment for Democracy, which is happy to cut them checks. If you think about it from the U.S. government's perspective, if the U.S. was involved here in funding this, $213 million to overthrow an enemy government is pretty cheap by their standards. It's a lot cheaper than overthrowing Saddam Hussein was, or trying to overthrow, and failing the North Vietnamese government. But I think the problem that these guys keep running into is that you can't overthrow, by a military coup, a government which is heavily supported by the military. People forget that Chavez came out of the military. And so the base of support for, his party and his movement and all that was the Venezuelan military and remains to be. So you're not going to convince the military to rise up against Maduro unless Maduro does something, against them. And so that's why, even out of these 300 guys that they tried to gather to overthrow the government, who were mostly, I guess, foreign, ex-Venezuela military guys, a lot of them were still loyal to the government and just went in as spies and kept feeding the government information, and that's how Maduro's folks were able to capture, these few folks that actually did, try and invade. I have no idea what happened to the few hundred others. Maybe the rest of the 300 men were all spies. And so they just went back to, being Venezuelan soldiers as soon as they decided to execute this raid, and that the only guy was left was, these 2 Americans and a handful of true believers. Now, this one of these Americans, was interviewed on Venezuelan television, and of course he's singing like a Tweety bird, talking about how his specific role in the mission was to capture the airport in Caracas and wait for a plane to come from the United States to pick up Maduro and bring him to the U.S., presumably to be tried, just like Manuel Noriega, which does to me seem to indicate some kind of coordination with the U.S. government, because why would they be arresting Maduro on behalf of the U.S. government? You could say, well, there's a reward out that's put out by the U.S., but have you ever heard of vigilantes going out? I mean, this is kind of like a situation of the president issuing letters of marque and reprisal. That just doesn't happen anymore. The U.S. does not want private citizens to go out and capture these guys. That's just not the way that the government operates these days. And so, this whole thing about arresting Maduro and bringing him to justice would seem to indicate that there's a specifically State Department kind of legitimization here. But of course, the documents that we have only show only show Guaido signing off on this agreement and all his cronies, which, again, you could say, well, that's a close enough of an association with the U.S. government, since Guaido is, about as much of a U.S. puppet as you can get, at being educated here. And I think he went to GW University, maybe even Georgetown, one of those two schools in Washington. And so the signature of a CIA asset, you could say, is as good as the signature of the director of the CIA. But even setting that aside, the way the U.S. is behaving is still pretty suspicious, because old Pompeo came out, and he's saying that the U.S. is going to use every tool possible to try and get these Americans back from Venezuela. He's not, accepting that, hey, these guys are criminals who tried to overthrow a foreign government, and so they're going to have to, pay for whatever crime they committed in that country. Pompeo's saying, no, we got to get those out. It's our responsibility to get those out. And, why is it your responsibility to get them out if they were acting, of their own volition? If this was the choice they made and they knew the risks that, hey, if you try and overthrow a government and you get captured, they're going to at least, lock you for life in prison, if not execute you. Back in the 19th century, it actually was a pretty common thing for American vigilantes to go down to Central and South America to overthrow various governments, along with dissidents and things. In fact, Narciso Lopez, an early Cuban revolutionary who wanted to overthrow the Spanish, gained a lot of support in the United States and went back to Cuba, I believe, with a band of Americans to try and overthrow the Spanish Empire. There have been other, Americans who have led incursions into places like Mexico. I believe maybe Baja California. They tried to secede. An American went down there and tried to secede from Mexico, I believe, somewhere around there in northwestern Mexico. And of course the whole Republic of Texas thing, but that's more in line with westward expansion and manifest destiny, not really normal Latin American politics. But there is precedent for this in the past, and of course in the past the U.S. government has always been totally unsupportive of these guys. In fact, there was a thing called the Neutrality Act back then, which said that it was illegal for Americans to try and overthrow foreign governments. That if you did so, it was a crime here. If you overthrew a foreign government and came back to America, you'd be prosecuted, because you're essentially making the U.S. look bad. You're making war as an American, without sanction from your government, and that can reflect badly on all other Americans if an American overthrows, say, the Venezuelan government. But in this case, Pompeo is very, very supportive. So my assumption that I'm working on now is that this was, in fact, sanctioned by the U.S. in some way. And if that is indeed the case, this has to be a tremendous embarrassment, because this really seemed to be amateur hour, this whole operation. But who knows? Maybe now that these Americans have been captured and Pompeo's saying, hey, we got to get them back, maybe that's a good reason to invade Venezuela on its own. I believe the U.S. has already got those Navy ships down there. I guess it wouldn't be too hard to just sit them in the harbor and, land on the shore and send some Marines on shore to go break these guys out of prison. And of course, while they're at it, the Marines might as well arrest Maduro, on his criminal charges, and bring him back to the United States. Or who knows? Maybe like the Bay of Pigs for Castro, this could, signal sort of the last gasp of America's attempt to overthrow him. Either way, I think there's still more information that's going to come out about this whole situation, so I'll stay tuned for that. If you gain anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day, and I hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.